Hello and welcome to another episode of Latitude. And in this, we go back to another subject which we have touched in the past, but not found answers completely to the challenges that the world faces and India faces. And this is with respect to energy security. As some of us know, there has suddenly been a hike in the prices of crude oil, and with it, it has had a ripple effect on various things, on the global economy and also on the growth of many countries and the calculations that they had for their post-pandemic recovery. To understand what this would mean for India with the rise in crude oil prices and the associated items with that, we have two earlier known experts and regulars on the show on energy security, and perhaps India's two best minds on energy security. We have with us Mr. Narendra Taneja, who is often regarded in global forums as the best voice of India on energy security. And we have Ambassador Talmiz Ahmed, who in his 2 or 3 areas of expertise, energy security figures high, has had considerable experience with the Arab world, having had 4 tenures as India's ambassador in the Gulf countries, and will educate us on the global dimensions. So I start with you, Ambassador Ahmed sir. My understanding is that the prices of oil have gone up primarily because there is again a risk premium that is being associated with the price of oil or crude oil. And this comes from the ongoing conflict in Ukraine, its implications, and the fact that Russia supplies or used to supply 10 to 25% of the world's oil, but now is barred from doing so, barring aside a few countries, including China, that Russia supplies to. Also, the fact that Iran remains out of the loop because of the sanctions on Iran, and therefore a major supplier is not being able to meet global demand. And the Europeans have started eating into the supply chain that would have normally supplied to countries like India from the Gulf countries, because their own supplies from Russia have been restricted because of a certain degree of sanctions, but not entirely so. So are there other reasons also for the price of oil now, having again jumped to $122 plus minus a barrel, which is what the case was in March, and there was alarm about it. It dropped a bit and it's gone back again. What are the reasons?
Oil prices are fixed on the basis of supply and demand, as simple as that. And because the global scenario is extremely volatile and extremely uncertain, prices have been extremely uncertain as well. There was a situation a few years ago when you had oversupply, when the Americans had started pouring shale oil into the world market, and prices had crashed at that time. And then since then, because of control over production, OPEC, later expanded into OPEC Plus, has been restraining production and has been managing to keep prices above $50. Then you have geopolitical factors. Geopolitical factors are sources of extraordinary uncertainty. Earlier, it was the outlook relating to Iran and the nuclear agreement, which would have brought Iranian oil into world markets. And then we had the pandemic. The pandemic has really been a source of extraordinary confusion because the global economy had collapsed, and then it has started recovering. And as it started recovering, there was expectation of greater demand for oil. And then you have the Ukraine war. So you will see that the world scenario has gone from crisis to crisis, and petroleum prices have been reflecting this situation. So now we are in a scenario of uncertainty as well, because without any planning, without any warning, the Americans announced an embargo on the supply of Russian oil, and then have had to backtrack with extraordinary embarrassment because the Europeans can't do without that oil. So the Russians are selling huge quantities of oil, largely to the Europeans. They have got in the last 100 days, they have got $97 billion of oil revenue. At least 60% has come from Europe. Then, of course, India and China have come into the picture and are also buying that oil. So there is a very weird situation which is coming in from the Americans. It seems as if they have no clue as to how to manage the scenario. Earlier, you had Joe Biden announcing that he would that he would be releasing stocks from the special petroleum reserve, but that had no impact whatsoever. So yes, there are uncertainties now relating to the pandemic, and then to the Ukraine war, as well as supplies from the Iranian sources. Finally, you have these quotas which have been given to OPEC producers, but none of them has been able to produce with any degree of fulfillment in terms of the commitment, other than Saudi Arabia and the Emirates. Many major producers have not been able to supply. So there is a sense of shortage in the global economy, which has pushed the prices up very recently.
True, true. In fact, I read that OPEC had agreed to supply $648,000, 648,000 barrels per day, but even that hasn't been able to stall the rise in oil prices. And Mr. Biden has obviously expressed discomfort with rising oil prices, even back home for him in the United States, where the price per gallon of oil has gone well beyond America's acceptable benchmark of, I think, $6 a barrel. So there are problems there. But Mr. Taneja, looking closer home at the Indian picture, the Indian foreign minister is recently on record to say that the Russia-Ukraine war has thrown up a crisis in food, fuel, and fertilizers. And obviously, fuel is a factor that is more than just the Russia-Ukraine war, because fertilizers do come a lot, or used to come a lot, from Ukraine. Food grain, again, from Ukraine. But our fuel requirements are largely met by the Gulf countries. So is there going to be a let-up, or are we looking at all our budgetary calculations going through the roof?
Well, Maru, good question. I mean, since we are a heavy importer, we roughly import 86% of total requirement. Of course, that includes oil. We import, refine, and then export. That's a part of it. But what basically my sense is the foreign minister was referring to was about the prices. When you look at the crude oil prices today, for instance, if you go by demand and supply fundamentals, I don't see any reason for oil prices to be more than, let's say, $85 per barrel on demand and supply. Not a dollar more than $85 per barrel. In fact, if you can manage it well, it could easily come down even less than $80 per barrel. But the price we are paying today are like in excess of $120 per barrel. But when it comes to Indian basket, in the region of $170 per barrel, which means these extra $30 per barrel is Ukraine premium. Call it Ukraine premium or sanctions premium or Russia premium, I leave it to you. But the point is that, we are paying $30 per barrel extra every day because the United States decided to sanction Russian oil without consulting anybody or without even thinking it through carefully. Entire world is paying the price. Russia might be suffering, we don't know, but America is suffering. America's economy is suffering. The European economy is suffering. The world is suffering. India is suffering. And so for no fault of ours, we are paying today $30 per barrel, extra. That is Ukraine premium. And by the way, it's very easy to calculate. We consume 5 million barrels of oil every day. So 5 million into $30. We are talking of a mind-boggling figure that we are paying the Indian consumer. For what? Because America miscalculated, or they decided to weaponize oil. For what? To what gain? We don't know. Even American consumers, the Western consumers are asking the same question. So, according to me, I think weaponizing oil or, imposing sanction on Russian oil was suicidal. It was a strategic mistake. And I think it's high time they rectify it. There are some signs now that there are consultation between Europe and America going on, and they basically, without withdrawing the sanctions, they will let the Russian oil flow into global market because they have realized that actually, sanctioning Russian oil is actually a bigger loss for the Western economies and the global economy than the Russian economy. Now, the point here is that as far as we are concerned, our situation is like this. there are no constraints in terms of supply. We can always, we hardly import any oil from Russia anyway. We have not been importing more than 2%, oil from Russia. The reasons are mainly logistics. Shipping costs are high, insurance costs are high, tankers costs are high, and so on and so forth. But we have invested heavily in Russia. We have invested roughly $18 billion in Russian oil and gas in exploration production. And Russia has also invested heavily in India, about $12 billion only in one refinery in Jamnagar in Gujarat, which is now known as Nayara Energy. Even that Russian owned refinery in Jamnagar didn't import a single drop of Russian oil the whole of 2021. So the point is all economics. So it's not about, what they're complaining, America and the West, that, oh, India is in love with Russia, that's why importing Russian. No, it's economics. It's cheaper for us to buy. Let's say if they're willing to give us discount, we're very happy to buy from whichever geography. That's how it works. It's economics at the end of the day. But as far as India is concerned, luckily, there are no big supply constraints. And luckily, we have got the Middle East just next door, which has got, surplus supply. And if required, we can, go for arrangements with some other countries too. But Russia has been a big supplier of oil to the global economy. Russia roughly counts for 12.6% of the global oil production. That's the same size as Saudi Arabia. The biggest producer is the United States. But that said, at the same time, I think America should have thought it very carefully before imposing the sanctions. It is still not too late for them to go slow on the sanctions so that the prices can come down. And by the way, Maru, there are elections to American Congress this year. And if oil prices remain where they are, President Biden's Democratic Party will lose elections in the Congress. And that will be a challenge for him 2024. So therefore, I think it's in America's interest, global economy's interest that, they do something and they go slow if they don't want to withdraw for whatever reason.
Very well put. Very well put. I mean, we need to go in for a break, but all I can say is that, there were other strategic reasons driving America's agenda. Mr. Biden wanted to bounce back from the humiliation of Afghanistan. The American arms industry needed a conflict to be able to bleed the rest of the Europeans to pay for what America needed as a kind of shot in the arm for the arms industry. And of course, oil has been, at the receiving end in terms of suppliers. And Russia, still, despite all that, I believe, is still making money selling oil. But more of that after a break. Welcome back. We are looking at the rising prices of crude oil and the impact on the economies of the world, including India, and also the fact that how energy security is so crucial for the growth plans of all countries, including India. Ambassador Ahmed sir, some years ago in a paper you had written on energy security that I managed to dig out and read, you had said that China and India accounted for less than half the GDP of the G7 countries in 2010. By 2016, that is 2060, the combined GDP of these two countries could exceed that of the OECD areas only if their energy security is assured. China has managed to get that assurance, I think, sorted out with more and more closer ties with Russia. And it's not really bothered about American announcements and sanctions. The challenge for us is to keep our options open in the event if the Gulf countries, for some reason, decide to arm twist us for geopolitical reasons or for the fallout of something domestically in India or our policies in our neighborhood. And then where do we go with our oil and energy requirements? Mr. Taneja has rightly brought out that what we receive from Russia, what we have imported from Russia is really pretty much a pittance compared to what we get from the Arab world. Since the Russian troops invaded the Ukraine, India has received only 34 million barrels of discounted Russian oil, and the import value is a lot more if we were to calculate actuals. But it's still, as Ambassador and now Foreign Minister Jaishankar has said, that it is something that probably the West consumes in half a day.
Yeah, with regard to your query relating to the Gulf, I should straight away clarify that Gulf countries do not get involved with domestic issues pertaining to other countries. Secondly, as far as oil supplies are concerned, since 1973, there has been no occasion when they have been made an instrument of political policy. So I would like to straight away discount this concern that you have raised about any disruption in supplies. The recent spat that you saw was connected with something quite different. It related to the person of the Prophet and his family, and that is something which is well known and it is well documented all over the world. Once you get over that, I think by and large, course correction will be taken, is already being taken on both sides. And I imagine that this little spat that we've had will be a matter of history. Coming back to supplies to us, India has already diversified sources of supply for its oil. We got oil in 2019, 2020. We got oil from 40 countries. But the top 10 countries provided 80%. And I would say that most of the Gulf countries, which together provide about 60% of our needs, would be in the top 10. Sometimes the number changes. I mean, you have these days, Russia has become a major supplier in a particular month. But I would say that between Saudi Arabia, Iraq, and Iran, and to a certain extent, Emirates and Kuwait, these are the countries that are likely to dominate supplies to India. And I think that pattern will continue. There is no reason whatsoever to review this. As you know, this relationship is it goes back several decades, and there has been no disruption in supplies as far as we are concerned. When there was a war between Iraq and Iran, then that time there was a temporary disruption, was immediately made up by other suppliers. When Iraq occupied Kuwait, there was a disruption and Saudi Arabia stepped into the picture. And then I should also remind you that we have not purchased oil from the Iranians. And I think that needs a course correction sooner rather than later. And once we have that kind of course correction, I can't imagine any situation where we should have concerns relating to supplies to us from the region.
Okay, well put, sir. That clarification was much needed. Mr. Taneja, sir, it is said that rising oil prices obviously impact every economy. There are figures that are doing the round that the rise in prices have eaten into our foreign exchange reserves from $631 billion in January, which is now down to about $601 billion. But there is also another factor that if India wants to grow at the speed it wishes to, it could soon look at consuming up to 7 million barrels a day. You talked about 5 million today. It could become soon 7 million barrels a day. And a 10% rise in oil prices could lead to an increase of a $15 billion for India in the current account deficit. And a 0.4 or 0.5% of its GDP could be impacted, leading to depreciation of the rupee and all other calculations of the government. So do you want to put some comfort into the minds of our economists that when they run headlines to say oil prices rising, so everything else is going to fall, is it going to be that rapid or all this takes time?
Well, interesting question. You see, the fact is, Maruf, that we are an oil economy. And though we are doing very well in renewables, especially in solar, the importance of oil or gas is not going to come down. In fact, it's only going to go up. We are roughly consuming 5 to 5.2 million barrels a day. At present, you talked about 7 million barrels. But if we really want to sustain the growth at 8% and become $10 trillion economy, I think we will probably be consuming more than that. My own sense is OPEC is 9 million barrels about 20 years from now, India's consumption. My own sense is we will be probably somewhere between 7.5 barrels to 8.5 barrels per day. That would be our requirement. What we are facing now, is a kind of structural deficit. There are three reasons. Number one is that, 5 years back, you must have seen headlines. The world was saying oil is bad, oil is dirty. Demonizing oil was, quite fashionable, mostly in the West. The result is that sufficient investment didn't go into oil and gas. So there is this structural deficit. Then came, of course, COVID. and the third came, Ukraine now. So the result is that, the oil and gas, especially the exploration production, sufficient investment has not gone into it. And the world will have to pay the price for it. There is no alternative to oil for long, long time to come, at least 12 to 15 years. And where is that oil going to come from? We have seen demand is already growing. As we talk today, there are shortages of petrol, diesel across the world, including India. So the problem is that, we face this now. If we have to sustain this growth, that means that we will need more oil. And oil in now 2023 and onward is going to move only in one direction, that is north. I would not be surprised if crude oil in 3 years from now actually is in the region of $130, $140 on sustained basis. So we as an economy, as an emerging economy with large population and a big energy deficit, we need to prepare for it. The question is, are we preparing for it? Yes, we talk of renewables, we talk of hydrogen. Would that be enough? Answer is no. Our economy will still need more oil and more natural gas and even more coal. 80% of our energy needs are met by coal, oil, and biomass, solid biomass. 80%. Is that going to change anytime soon? Not anytime soon. Now, when you look at 10 years horizon, 15 years, we need more oil, but the price of oil is going to be in the region of $130 to $140 per barrel. Are we ready for that? Is our economy ready for it? Do we have got plans for that? Are we future ready? Answer to all these questions, Maruf, unfortunately, is no.
Yes, I know it's a grim picture. If you really begin to look at what we need to really prepare for in the future, yes, there have been assurances coming from this government and the previous government that, India is looking at alternatives. But to sum up, all I can say is that if you really look at everything else that could come in the form of alternate measures or renewables or whatever, I don't think the figure would go anywhere more than 10 to 15% of our total requirements. And that I would count nuclear energy, I would count wind, solar, and all those factors at the optimum what they could provide to India, maybe 5 years or more down the line. You're absolutely correct when I go through the figures about really where our core consumption comes from. And it comes from coal, it comes from oil, it comes from gas, and it comes from biomass. So we just have to work more towards it. But maybe on another day, as we've discussed in the past, we will look at what are our options for the future. And that would not be just based on rising oil prices, but a general discussion on really, is there a way forward? But until then, thank you very much, sir, for your wisdom.
Thank you.
And thanks to everybody for watching until our next episode. Goodbye.